Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Happy Wednesday. Today we've got a really interesting sort of thought-invoking topic, I think. We're going to be talking about what, on one hand, might well be my biggest weakness or thing that I struggle with when learning languages, but also learning anything else in general, right? So as many of you will know, I've been really heavily interested in data science for the last year or so, and so through that, I've also been branching off and studying lots of other things that are very related. So statistics has been a big one, for example. And then also I'm doing a lot of computer science stuff, and through that, recently getting very interested in things like cryptography and various aspects of cybersecurity, just always learning lots and lots of things. And I find that this particular thing, it's always something that in some ways holds me back. But on the other hand, it genuinely might also be my biggest strength and something that really helps me in the long run. And so the reason for this framing is that today's video is mostly to illustrate, I think, how, there are many ways to become a more effective learner, right? And I think that very often we think about identifying our weaknesses, right? Whatever that means. And then the instinct is, well, I need to flip it and do the opposite, right? Maybe my weakness is that I'm lazy, so I gotta flip that and suddenly become not lazy, right? Well, that works for very sort of objectively, perhaps like bad things. Like saying you're lazy is inherently a negative framing, right? But when you actually dig down and think about what is it that makes you who you are, right? What are your preferences, things you like to do, things you don't like to do? It's very often not quite that simple, and I find that it is really powerful to be able to look at the things that you just like to do, things that feel innately just a part of who you are and what makes you tick, what gives you a spark. And if some of those things seem to be holding you back, it's very often more effective, in my opinion, to think about how you can turn those things as they are essentially into strengths and things that drive you forward. And so that's the sort of meta topic of today's video. And so it seems like a good video for the cozy sight glass mug. And yeah, let's just jump in. Okay, so let's just jump right into it. The thing that I have always struggled with when it comes to learning anything, especially languages, is I always have this deep need inside of me to go backwards, right? Whenever I take sort of a break, whenever I lose my momentum with something, whatever it is. So let's say I'm studying an app for languages, or maybe I'm doing a textbook, right? And I'm pretty early on. And then I have a few weeks where I don't study that particular resource, right? Maybe things get busy, maybe I switch and do something else, maybe priorities shift, whatever it is. When I come back to it, I guarantee you, inside of me, in my core, I feel this need to go back to the beginning, right? And this goes for everything, right? I cannot pick up a book that I read halfway through a few months ago and just pick up where I left off. Absolutely not. Out of the question. Like, there's this thing inside of me. I'm like, no, I have to go back to the beginning because I want to make sure that all the context is fresh. I want to make sure that I didn't forget anything. I don't know what it is. And so I'll give you a non-language learning example. Recently, I've been doing a bunch of study around data structures. So this is all sort of computer science stuff, and of course bleeds into a lot of things I do with data science. And I've been taking these online courses in what we call linear data structures. You can think of those as sort of more simple data structures versus complex data structures. And I've done this online course where I've gone through all of the linear data structures, done them really well, studied them theoretically, implemented them in Python, which is a programming language, and then I've moved on to the more complex data structures. But the thing is, I keep not managing to finish the entire course. And so 3 times now, I went back to the very beginning and reviewed everything I'd done with those sort of simpler linear data structures. And so it's taken me a long time to actually push forward and finish the course, which I now finally did. And so this is exactly how it works with language learning. And it goes the same thing for books. I have books that I've started, didn't finish. And so essentially, the biggest thing that this holds me back with is it takes me a lot longer to get through stuff, right? I don't go as quickly as a lot of other people do, certainly in the short term, right? And so at this rate, over the course of my life, I may perhaps finish less stuff, right? So if we think about reading, right? I think reading is something that not everybody likes, but a lot of us can relate to having an ever-growing pile of books, or perhaps it's a electronic version, whatever. We get these collections of books and things we want to read, and typically that collection grows much faster than we can possibly, actually read these things. And so there's this kind of dilemma, and I like this. I think this is a wonderful part of the journey of life for me. It's a wonderful challenge in life, is that I know I'm not going to be able to read everything that I want. And so there is this sort of underlying concern in my life. I want to get through as much as I can, right? And so naturally, this worries me a little bit, right? That I'm a slow reader. I'm an extremely thorough reader. I reread things, I take notes. So undoubtedly, right, I get through less stuff. Now, at the same time, this may well be what ends up being my greatest strength, right? Because essentially what happens is that I end up developing extremely good fundamentals in basically everything that I do, right? So with programming, for example, I told this story in my video recently about how I became a programmer after being a polyglot. I did like 5 or 6 courses on JavaScript, for example. But each of those courses I did like 2 or 3 times. And I've learned so many technologies over the last few years, building Journaly. I've studied so many different concepts. And in every single case, I have both repeated the same course several times, but I've also done multiple different courses to cover the same materials. And that's how I approach language learning, right? I've talked in the past about how one of my, really good methods that I use is I study the same sort of content multiple times from multiple different resources, right? So I'll go over the basics of Chinese from this app, from that app, from this textbook, this YouTube channel, this Instagram account, just attacking the same information from lots of different resources, but also over and over again. It's something that I like to do. And so, as you can imagine, what ends up happening is I really, really get those basics down, and I even come back to them much later. So in French, I've told this story before, it was after I already worked like multiple jobs using French professionally all day long, every day. I was already reading my first French novels. I went back and bought like a big French grammar book, and I started going over the very basics of French grammar again. And I found in that moment, like, oh my God, there is so much stuff that I now understand because I have this huge amount of global sort of context on the French language, so many life experiences that I can relate things to, I can anchor memories in, I can free associate all over the place. Because now I'm looking at those basics from this new place in life and of experience with that thing I'm learning. So that's what I've always done. And yeah, on one hand, it holds me back in a way because, for example, let's take German. So many of you will know I recently came back to German. I've been documenting my journey, and the first thing I did was went straight back to Babbel, and I started doing literally the very first lessons of German, covering the absolute most basic things in the German language, and I went all the way through that course. It took several months. So those are several months that I could potentially have been just jumping in, just go to the deep end, who cares? Like, just start reading books and doing things, right? I could have done that, and it probably would have also worked, but it's just not what I like to do. And I think I had a lot of good reasons for going back to Babbel in the beginning, but it is nevertheless a thing that like I said, from one perspective holds me back. And I do think that this makes me quite different than a lot of polyglots. At least, for example, let's take another thing. As many of you know, I love more intensive approaches to reading, for example. I like tearing things apart figuratively. I like highlighting, taking notes. I like to read difficult stuff that I'm really intrinsically interested in. And I foster this curiosity that I feel gets me through. I approach reading as a detective, right? Especially in a foreign language where there's so much that's sort of, obfuscated behind this layer of foreignness, of unknown, right? And it's so interesting. And then there's this like cultural layer where even if you can translate the words, you might be missing stuff in translation. And again, I approach that with this mountain of curiosity. I'm a detective. It's all about discovery. And I love that, but that's not what most polyglots do. Certainly what I've seen online over the last 10 years, right? Most people seem to favor a much more extensive approach, relying on massive exposure, relying on covering enormous amounts of content and picking up on patterns and seeing things over and over again. But that's just not what I like to do. And that's what I'm saying here. It's that very often the best method for you, but also the way that you can perhaps be most effective as a learner of a new skill, it does take a little bit of introspection and thought. And as I always say, it might not necessarily be the thing that the top people are recommending, perhaps, right? Or it might not be the same thing that someone you look up to does. And it might be a complete amalgamation of lots of different things. And that's why I try to present lots of different perspectives on this channel, bringing on more and more guests, and that's going to continue. So yeah, I hope that resonates with a lot of you. It's something that I've often thought about, should I change this? Is something wrong with me? But this is just how I am, and I think it makes me slower in the short term, right? But in the long run, it seems to make me faster. Right? So when it comes to programming, or like just as an example, right? The general perception of my colleagues, of people around me has been, wow, you've really come a long way extremely quickly, right? In terms of, advancing my skill set and things I'm comfortable doing in the last 3 years, or almost 4 years now since I first began teaching myself. So that's the interesting thing about the way I approach learning, is that like many things in life, things that seem slower in the beginning, things that don't give you that immediate hit of adrenaline and, they can often be faster in the long run, which of course is something that we've known for a very, very, very long time as a species. But to this day, I think people still fall into the trap of what feels good right now, and just that seems like it's good. I don't know. It's fascinating to me. This is a very pervasive thing. It's something that frustrates me working in corporate America, working in fast-paced startups. It's something that seems to differentiate me a lot. Wherever I go, this instinct of like, let's go a little slower so that we can go faster. But that's a whole different topic. And it's not about comparing myself to others. This is about just introspecting and saying, this is me. So that's the topic, that's the video. One more sip of slightly cold coffee, and I'll see you back here on Friday for another video.